These are your 9-5A notes, solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. One more strategy to solve quadratic equations. This is the last. Some prefer this method over all the other methods. It's long, but it is the least amount of thought process. Because if you can see in the name, it's a formula. So I don't know about you guys, but anytime I use a formula, it is just a matter of plugging the right numbers in the right spots and doing some order of operations and calculations. So not a ton of thinking going on. So the quadratic formula is used to find the solutions of a quadratic equation. So if you use the formula will give you the solutions. So it's really important that your equation looks like the equation that I have right here. Okay, and if you notice, we went back to where the equation has to be set equal to 0. So the only time it doesn't equal 0 is when we solved by either the square root property or if we completed the square to solve. So if you get it in that form where A, B, and C are the coefficients of your quadratic term and then your linear term and then your constant, you're going to color coordinate them here. Oops. You can see where each of those shows up. I apologize. I'm not sure why I keep highlighting. So here's the formula. X equals the opposite of your b value plus or minus, because it's a square root, so we take both sides, the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and the whole thing is divided by 2a. So if you see in the equation, in the definition of a quadratic formula, your a value is the term out in front of the x squared, just like before. Your b value is your term in front of the linear term, and your c is your constant. If you plug those values into this formula, it'll give you the answers. I require 4 steps of work here, so there's going to be a lot of work to be shown, but it does find all solutions. It will find any type of solution you need it to find. So let's go ahead. First of all, I'm going to start off by defining those different values. So in the first part here, my a value out in front of that x squared is a positive 1. My b value out in front of x is a negative 2. And my c value is a negative 35. Remember, those terms take the signs of the number. So whatever sign is in front of it, it goes with that term. All right, the first step in the work is writing down the formula. Why? Because then you'll memorize it. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root. B squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. If you don't show that on your work, you will get marked down. The next step is substitution only. We're not going to do any calculations. You are just replacing the variables with their values. X equals the opposite of b. Well, if b is negative 2, the opposite of b is positive 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 35. Notice I put them in parentheses when I plug them in. I have not done any math. All over 2 times 1. I want to be able to see the a's, the b's, and the c's within your formula. So first step, write down the formula. Second step is substitution. Replace the variables with their numeric value. Okay, now the third step, you get to do 3 multiplications all at once. They're 3 unrelated multiplications, so we can do them all in one step. And so maybe you can see the 3 different multiplications we can do. We're going to leave this 2 out here, plus or minus. The first thing that we can do is the multiplication of negative 2 times itself because of negative 2 squared. So negative 2 squared becomes 4. That's the first multiplication we're doing. It's a negative 2 times a negative 2, so it makes a positive result. And then the next thing I'm going to multiply is the 4 and the 1 and the negative 35. Now when I multiply this, I know it says subtract 4ac, but I like to think of it as negative 4 times A times C. So if you have that, you have a negative times a negative, which is going to become a positive. And so when I multiply 4 times 1 times 35, I get 140. So if you want to leave it as a positive 4 and then say subtract, you're going to be subtracting a negative 140, which becomes positive 140. Or if you let the 4 assume that sign, you're still going to get a positive 140. So that was the second multiplication. I multiplied all three of those numbers, and then we're going to divide that by 2 times 1, and I can actually do that too. 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so we're on to our next step. Our next step is going to be addition. 2 plus or minus the square root of 144. I added the 4 and the 140 together, and then I divided by 2. I know that 144, the square root, is 12, so that's my next step. 2 plus or minus 12 all over 2. Now that we're at this step, I can separate it. Now that the radical's gone, all I have to do now is do 2 plus 12 divided by 2 and 2 minus 12 divided by 2. 2 plus 12 is 14, divided by 2 is 7. 2 minus 12 is negative 10, divided by 2 is negative 5. And so my two solutions are 7 and negative 5. So I think I actually lied there. I think there were more steps than what I had said before. So we've got 1 step is the equation, 2 is substitution, 3 is multiplication, 4 and 5 are kind of simplifying. You have 5 steps before you have the answer to every problem. But it was pretty brainless, pretty easy to do. All right, let's try this next one next to it. 9x squared plus 24x equals negative 16. Now let's look at that thing just for a second. It'd be atrocious to factor because they're really big numbers. You can't complete the square because you don't know how to complete the square when a is 9. Graphing would be atrocious. So this is sort of your only solution to that problem. Okay, so even though it's long, now they're going to start exposing you some of those more difficult equations that we've been hiding from you all this time. So before I can begin the whole process, I need to add 16 to both sides and get it equal to 0. So I have 9x squared plus 24x plus 16 equals 0. The 16 is the C value there. So I got my A value is 9, my B value is 24, and my C value is 16. So we're ready to start. X equals negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. You will eventually memorize that. Hopefully by the time these notes are done, you'll have it memorized. All right, so that was my formula. Now we're going to plug in the values. A negative B value, B is positive 24, so the opposite would be negative 24, plus or minus the square root of 24 squared minus 4 times 9 times 16. Big numbers there. All over 2 times 9. Didn't do any multiplications, just simply replaced values. X equals negative 24 plus or minus. Now we're ready to do 3 calculations. I'm going to square 24. 24 squared is 576. I'm going to multiply the 4 times 9 times 16, or the negative 4 times 9 times 16. And I end up with a negative 576 all over 18. Now you guys can kind of anticipate the next step. You see the 576 take away 576. I know that's going to become 0. Square root of 0 all over 18. The square root of 0 is just 0, so this kind of just cancels. There is no plus or minus. Your x value is negative 24 over 18, which is really 4/3. So if you simplify that, You could take a 6 out of both of those. So if I divide this by 6, I get negative 4. And if I divide the bottom by 6, I get 3. Negative 4/3 is my one solution. And I only got one solution because my plus or minus square root went away. There was no plus or minus the square root because the square root was 0. All right, let's continue. Got 2 more for you. Okay, so this one, we got to bring over the 4. If you feel confident bringing that 4 over, I don't really need to see the minus 4, minus 4. But if you want to, you can go ahead and do that. So it becomes minus 4 equals 0. Now that I have it equal to 0, I can see my A's, B's, and C's. Let's try it without having to list them or label them. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We write that down every time. My b value is negative 8. If you look at the equation, so the opposite of negative 8 is positive 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 4 all over 2 times 5. And so x equals 8 plus or minus the square root. Negative 8 squared is 64. And then I have a negative 4 times a 5 times another negative 4 gives me a positive 80. All over 10. When I add 64 and 80 together, I get 144. So I have x is equal to 8 plus or minus the square root of 144 all over 10. This one worked out again. I'm not sure how that happened twice. Square root of 144 is 12 all over 10. Now we're ready to separate. So from this point, I would say 8 plus 12 divided by 10, or 8 plus 12, or I'm sorry, 8 minus 12 divided by 10. That's the plus or minus part. Man, I can't win on that one. 8 plus 12 is 20. 20 divided by 10 is 2. 8 minus 12 is negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 10 is negative 2/5. So 2 and negative 2/5. All right, we got one more to do here. One more time. This one's all set up. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root. B squared minus 4ac all over 2a. The more you work with it, the better you're going to be at it. So my b value is negative 9, so the opposite would be positive 9. Plus or minus the square root of negative 9 squared minus 4 times 1 times 21 all over 2 times 1. Let's multiply. X equals 9 plus or minus the square root of 81. And then 4 times 21 times 1 is 84. So it's going to be a negative 84 there, all over 2. X equals 9 plus or minus the square root. 81, take away 84, leaves me with a negative 3, all over 2. At this point, you should be saying to yourself, wait a second, there's no such thing as a negative square root. And I don't know if your calculators will do it or not, but mine gives me an error message. When I try to take the square root of a negative number, it tells me I made an error. The reason is you can't have a negative number. When you multiply a number by itself, it can never give you a negative. It doesn't exist. They're actually called imaginary numbers, and we get into more of them in Algebra 2. So for right now, though, that's my clue that there's no solution. If you get a negative square root, that doesn't exist. Okay, so what this means is this parabola didn't cross the x-axis. If the graph, it didn't cross. And so we know now, no solution. All right, the only one I didn't show you is where you had to use the calculator. to get the non-perfect ones, but that's just pretty simple. We already did that before. So your summary, I want you to identify A's, B's, and C's for the first equation there. You don't have to do anything with them, just identify A, B, and C. And then for your practice problem, I want you to try one more all on your own. Good luck.